Welcome back, everybody, to Navigating Amateur Motocross, episode number 22, part of the Coach Robb Podcast Network, presented to you by HP Race Development. And I'm extremely proud to announce that, if you guys aren't aware of it by now, the co-host of this show actually owns HP Race Development. Mr. Derek Harris, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, wonderful, man. Thanks for having me on the show, and really excited to be here today.
No, this is a good one. As we get to the beginning of the year, we're titling this show Dyno Time. And, myself as a human performance specialist, I always say to our athletes, it takes 6 months to pivot the human body. It sometimes comes as bad news, frustrating news for young athletes, but it realistically, it takes 6 months for you to pivot the human body. So when you look at the idea that we will drop this show here in the month of February, and we're sitting 5, 6, 7 months out from Loretta's. So this is what I always say, it's go time. Yeah, this is the time when it matters the most to get the foundation and to come into Loretta's ripping on all levels. I want to talk today a little bit about what we do on the physical side. I wanted to get your opinion on how does it compare to the way that you develop motors? And let me pose this question right out of the blocks. I'm always intrigued, and I'm going to ask this question as a spectator, as a fan of the sport. I'm not an engineer. How in the world do you develop a motor for somebody who is going to be racing it 6 months from now, but maybe they just hit puberty and their body's going to change a lot over the next 6 months? How do you even begin to approach that? Do you have a strategy that you're willing to share with everybody? Because I'm not asking for your elixirs. You've got your special, I call it the Coca-Cola syrup. I don't want you to give away all your secrets, but how would you approach that?
That's a great question, and I think it stems on who they are, what they're doing. So, to give you an example that's unrelated to our sport, that I think is a good example because it's, you know, makes a lot of sense to me in this scenario is we're working on a flat track program this year, and the athlete's a top, American flat track pro, and the goal is to obviously chase a championship, whether or not he's not a factory guy, he does his own program, who knows, right? But at the end of the day, I was approached a few months ago by some individuals who said, "Hey, we'd like to have you work on this bike and evaluate and do these things." So now we know what our goal is. We know what we're trying to achieve. So that's 6 months down the road is realistically when that's going to happen. And the next part is establishing where we're at, right? So a baseline, you do that on the body, and then a plan or a target or a goal. And so in this scenario, we have a specific use case of flat track racing. We actually know that in some forms of flat track racing, it requires lots of horsepower. That's different than, let's say, motocross racing or supercross racing. And then on the flip side of that, we have different types of tracks in flat track. So we have really short tracks and we have really long tracks. So the short tracks do not require horsepower. The fundamentals are a lot more involved with bike and chassis setup, not something that is something we can affect with the engine. Of course, we can make the engine very rideable for those tracks. So that's our goal for those tracks, is to make the power very easy to ride. And so to give you an example as to targeting what we're going to do, like you would do with the human body, is for those tracks, we want to make sure that there's what maybe in our sport would call connection, but the rider is able to turn the throttle a set amount and get a set response. And this should be very predictable. So that means that if I turn my throttle 10 more percent, I should maybe in theory get 10% more power. Or realistically, that's not entirely possible, but our goal there would be to make it extremely intuitive so that when he's on the side of a tire sliding and he's on the edge of disaster, which is what all of our sport really is about, but that sport in particular, he doesn't hit too much power by accident, right? Just a little turn of the throttle jumps up in the power, and he doesn't have, he doesn't turn the throttle like a good amount and not get a response out of it. Meaning like, oh, I needed to break the tire loose and it just didn't do it because we had it mapped too weakly or whatever you want to call it. So that's an example of having a purpose, a direction, a goal, and all the above, but we have different use cases within his own racing. So for that particular program, we're going to have two different engine specs, and we're going to have a short track engine spec, and then we're going to have his long track engine spec. And of course, the long track is just make as much, from what I understand, from what the data and from what we've discussed with him, he's pretty much flat out the entire time around the racetrack. So the more horsepower you have, the better off you are. And there's very little throttle modulation and control at those tracks in comparison to the short tracks. Essentially, they're just running flat out, for 10 minutes. So, and then of course, there's all the other aspects that come in from our side. So not just making the power, but will it hold up? And that's actually on our side of things, that's going to consume most of the next time that we have on that project, meaning it's not just power. It's going to actually be durability work on our side is actually going to be the consumption of time. And I think that that's analogous to you on building a durable athlete. If maybe correct me if I'm wrong. Like how, so in your sense, same thing for you. So we have a target at Loretta, 6 months from now.
Yeah.
How do we get there?
Well, it's interesting you bring it up because we refer to it as muscle symmetry. I've got to make sure that the left side of the body is as strong as the right side, especially when we deal with injuries and any body part that's been casted. You have what we call muscle atrophy. Muscle shrinks, we lose power, we lose endurance. So very early on, now when we're talking about 6 months out from Loretta's, I actually need to go back another 3 to 4 months because our Loretta's program started back in November, but that's a different story. It's very interesting that you bring it up in the way that you did, because if I have someone's right leg has been in a cast and is 3% smaller, let's just say for even numbers has 3% less strength, they go down a rhythm section. There's always going to be more load on the left peg than the right peg, just simply because of power and weight distribution. That now throws the balance of the bike off. So the very first thing that we start with back in November is we start by taking body measurements. We look for muscle symmetry. Then we do muscle testing, and we break it into 3 dimensions: left, right, above and below the belly button, in front and behind the pegs, in front and the back of the body. Because you ride the motorcycle in 3 dimensions of movement: left peg, right peg, above the seat, below the seat, in front of the pegs and behind the pegs. I need to make sure that there's parity in the muscle in all 3 dimensions of movement. We look at muscle symmetry. We then take that and we run a series of assessments. We test strength, endurance, and lactate tolerance. And then we say, okay, to your point, what are we training for? For today's conversation, we'll say we're Loretta's, 6 days of racing when you include practice, right? So we have 1 moto a day of 20. We have 4 days of 1 moto a day. We have 1 day with 2 motos if you qualified in both classes. So the duration, 20-minute moto per class. It's hot, it's humid. We know exactly what we need to train for. And then we train to the specificity of exactly that. Based on, as you say, where are we at, where are we going? We do baseline assessments, figure out what the biggest opportunity for improvement is, given what we're training for. Now, what makes it interesting is the qualifiers in between. Now, I want to throw a curveball at you here. I always use an analogy of a set of railroad tracks. I always say to the riders and their parents, think about one rail as your strength base and the next as your aerobic engine. If we put it in terms of the motorcycle, think about the size of your piston, think about the size of your carburetor. If I have an oversized piston and an undersized carburetor, the power will never be seen because it can't get enough air-fuel mixture. Muscles are exactly the same way. You might be able to pick your motorcycle up and run around the track with it, but you run out of breath. Your limiter isn't your strength. Your limiter is your aerobic capacity. So vice versa, you might be able to go all day long, but you're going at a slow pace because you're not strong enough to maintain a faster rate of speed. What's faster, 65 or a 450? Why? Size of the piston, strength base is your engine, right? So if you stop and you think about, I'm always trying to make sure that the aerobic engine and the strength base always develops on par with one another. That's why I use the rail, because if one develops at the expense of the other, the train derails and you're pissed off and you're frustrated and you don't go forward. I hear so much about, hey man, you've got a lot of power, but it's not transferable to the rear wheel. It's not usable power. For me, it's very simple. We test every 6 weeks and we can show with the best of accuracy, hey, both systems are developing on par with one another, therefore your program's elevating. What if somebody's coming to you screaming for tons of power, but how many pros have you worked with? You don't have to give any of them by name. They're like, this thing's too doggone fast. We need to detune this. It's too powerful. It's unusable. You talked about the idea of, like you say, that 10% on the throttle, let's just say for relative terms, translates to 10% at the rear end. But what happens when someone's coming to you begging for more and more power and you realize it's not usable power at this point, given the bike and the conditions and dirt types and styles?
Well, let's give an example back to the flat track bike and just throw some hard numbers at what is possible out of, let's say, a 450. That bike right now is 70 plus horsepower on my dyno, which is a lot of horsepower in my dyno. I've had, for example, 500cc 2-strokes from like BRC, which is like a modernized 2-stroke that are like the lower to mid 60s. So anybody, and on my dyno, a CR500 of the later generations, not the quote unquote as fast ones, but still a fast one. It's like low 50s. So if you're from that era, you're like, okay, those bikes were beasts, and they were beasts. this bike makes a ton of power, right? I can promise you nobody could ever use that power on a dirt bike track at any point in time. And the factory certainly could make that power if they so chose. It wouldn't, if I can make it, they can make it, right? So the that bike would be completely unusable at max power on almost every single track in the country for any rider, including Eli Tomac. Eli Tomac would then utilize his clutch to slow that bike down at most scenarios. And of course, now with the modern electronics, there's a lot going on there to help slow bikes down too. I just had this conversation today, and obviously I won't comment too much onto it, or I won't say what and who and what and where, whatever. But the conversation literally was with someone involved at a factory today. And the conversation was about why the starts were so good for this particular place. And it was about how taking power away at the right time is what makes that happen. And so for a lot of people who are always convinced that more power is the answer, 100% the success rate for not just this effort, but other efforts is making sure that the power is when you need it and not when you need it. And for good starts, I mean, if you're into drag racing at all, the second a top fuel dragster spins the tire, it's done. The race is over, right? You see him light the tire up and it's over. So getting maximum acceleration is not, the top fuel dragsters make 10,000 plus horsepower, but they only put down from, let's say, the launch point to the first half of the track, they're putting down significantly less than that because the car can't take it yet. And so that's an example of in a scenario where power is king. There's no question that they need to make 12,000 horsepower to go, 330 miles an hour in, 3 seconds, right? Which is unbelievable. But at the very beginning of the race, if they put down all 12, race is over. And so this is where I think most athletes and parents go wrong. And actually, ironically, the same conversation was it was all about starts. But with our Get-See systems, this is stuff we sell. This is stuff we've talked to clients about. Very few of them are using it because they think they know better. But the modern way of teaching starts is at all the facilities is like pin it wide open and then dump the clutch or modulate the clutch. Realistically, they're trying to tell the young kids, pin it wide open and slip the clutch the perfect amount to get your start. That's a technique that can work. And if you're really good with the clutch and all these things, you can make it work. However, I grew up doing starts where you had less RPM, less throttle. You had some clutch modulation, but realistically, you applied throttle and power as you went at the rate that you needed it. And to me, this is much easier because we don't have an excess of power, which then causes us a wheelie, wheel speed, wheel spin, and then of course, reactionary results to the clutch. So the second I feel the front tire coming up, I go to use the clutch. Well, we both know that there is a human limit to reaction time. And that limit is, well documented. But by the time that you realize that the tire's wheeling, you make a corrective action, you can actually physically pull the clutch in, the bike reacts, there's a delay on everything, you're way behind the 8 ball. And so for these elite teams at the top level who are utilizing all of these technologies to their advantage nowadays, they're essentially having a computer do that much faster than what you or I can do it. The problem is you can have a hard time getting riders to trust it, or you're getting dads to trust it. The answer is always more horsepower. It's not. The answer is putting down exactly the limit of horsepower for a start, for example, that the track and the bike can take in that moment. And right, that's a challenge. So I'm a little bit sidetracked on your question, but
no, it's spot on. Let me jump on the train that you just started right there, because I'll have an athlete that will do field testing all the way up to and including Loretta's. We call them race day simulations, right? And we'll think about this from 4 particular perspectives. You get 39th gate pick. You're out in the left 40. You know it. I don't think you should anticipate you're going to get the whole shot, and do everything you can not to get pushed into the infield. Because if you're in the infield, you're in trouble, right? So somebody comes around lap number 1, and they're in panic mode because they're in 30th place because they got a bad gate pick and they got pushed out. And then the rider just rides at an intensity level that is not going to match the 20-minute moto. You're at an intensity that maybe you could hold for 2 laps. And this is a problem that I have with the qualifiers being so short, and then 6 weeks later, they're supposed to do a 20-minute moto. Selfishly for us, from a physiology standpoint, that works to our advantage because we know how to train to make sure that the athletes are ready. The facilities do it incorrectly, unfortunately, for the parents. But what I want you to think about is if you as an athlete go out and on lap number 2, you go across that anaerobic threshold. I'm thinking about too much power, right? If you
Yep.
dump, like, I like your drag strip analogy. If you dump all that power in the first 100 meters, you've lost the race because you've broken loose. They deliver it more as they go down. You cross that anaerobic threshold on lap 2, and you know you've got 8 more laps. All of a sudden, now you go across that anaerobic threshold. It's not if you're going to go backwards, it's by how far and how fast you're going to go backwards, because you've crossed that anaerobic threshold. Then what ends up happening is, and like you said, no, not to throw moto dads under the bus, but they're very difficult to deal with. They think they have all the answers, and then you download the heart rate data and you go, look, little Johnny went across whatever that magical number is, which we've tested, and we know don't go across it because the results are guaranteed. You will go backwards. Why? You're a mammal that thrives on oxygen. You go into a mode of anaerobic without the presence of oxygen, you will go back. Not if, but how far. We get into lap number 2, they panic. They go way across their threshold, forgetting there's 8 more laps. Is that because the horsepower is too much and they didn't know how to distribute it? Absolutely. Because we tested, and I don't want to give away our secrets, but we have a certain threshold of duration that we make our athletes achieve. We train them to achieve a distance and a duration that makes the 20-minute moto very digestible. It almost feels easy for our athletes. That's a perfect mode. That's a perfect race, right?
I agree with that, right? And I think this is one thing that on two strokes in particular, especially nowadays, two strokes are so well evolved from the manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty hard to take any two-stroke KTM 85 Super Mini, well, not the Super Mini because you're building a Super Mini, but a standard bike, an 85 or YZ 125 or a KTM 125, and make a bike that will get better starts than the stock bike. It's very hard. And that's because the stock bike is just pretty much all its R&D time has gone into kind of sort of that type of thing. I mean, obviously there's more to it, but the stock bike's going to do that incredibly well. And it's going to do it incredibly well because it's going to put down just enough power, not too much. It's not going to have a weird blip or hip or peak. You know, like as you're putting traction down, it's not going to break it loose. And then stock bikes generally have the best, easiest, if you shift them a little early, they pick up really well. So like a stock bike is going to have a wider window of error, meaning, okay, I accidentally shifted too early, it'll probably pull it. Whereas like some of the mod bike things you have to do, you're going to, you know, let's say the usable window is here and you modified it. Usable window is now here. It's a little bit less. It's bigger, but it's narrower. And that's sort of kind of, unfortunately, how two strokes have always worked. Now, certain bikes, like if I'm modifying a YZ85, they're so behind the times, they just get better. You know, like on my dyno, they're like 6+ horsepower off of a KTM stock to stock. There's about 35 years of technological advancement between the two bikes. And yeah, Yamaha can put new colors on it, but it ain't a new bike. So that bike can get better. However, versus a stock YZ85, it still narrows up. Even though on the dyno it's better everywhere, now the transmission hasn't been built for that additional power. So like it's through the gears quicker, right? Because we don't have the spacing we really need. And there's just, you know, you can go to the rear sprocket and spread it out, but now the actual gear spacings are not designed around all of that. So it's just one of those scenarios where everything you do is going to make it tougher. Now, I would say 4 strokes are kind of not this case. Like as an example, this flat track bike makes insanely big numbers. Okay. However, it makes almost more power at every single part of the power curve than a production bike. It didn't give away power to do that at any point. And so it's just more, right? So it's going to kind of be the same as stock, way faster, but it didn't give up its ability to be ridden. However, most athletes on that motorcycle on a motocross track would never get over half throttle because at half throttle on that bike, it's above wide open power of a production bike. So, you know what I mean? And we have data on that. On track, a guy doesn't use a 450. I mean, I even Tomax data would probably show outdoors that he's at wide open throttle maybe 11 or 12% of the time, right? He's just not wide open very often, and he'd probably be the most of all the athletes. So, yeah. You know what I mean? How often he demands peak power is very limited. But yeah, to your point, yeah, I think your analogy is right on. It's like the kid sprinted too early. It's kind of like putting down too much power too quickly and then breaking the tire loose, wheeling the bike, slipping the clutch, and then just getting rid of all the advantage you had of having extra horsepower.
Well, if we take what you just said right there, dumping too much horsepower early, think about all the moving parts. In my world, it's pretty easy, right? If an athlete shows up fed, rested, and hydrated, we're prepared. We've trained and we field tested and we've race day simulated enough. We know we can go 20 minutes and never get tired. We know we train to have less than a 1 second deviation over 10 laps. It's all scientifically derived. But Now you get into the third component, and that's strategy. We call it the inverse relationship between volume and intensity. You have a 20-minute moto, but you make the mistake of going out as if it's a 3-minute sprint. You forget that you're on lap 2 of 10, and you cross that threshold. Now you come off, and now the dad says the fitness program doesn't work. The human performance program doesn't work. Because of a strategical mistake by the rider, the whole program sucks. How do you deal with a rider that, and I opened up today's conversation kind of in the same thread of thought. I'm impressed that you can take a rider that in January, February, maybe just hit puberty. They're a very good rider. You know that they're, for the most part, we're comfortable that they're going to punch their card all the way through and get to Loretta's. But then how do we build a bike? Because for me, it's easy. I can see as the rider develops physiologically, I can calculate that percentage of improvement, strength to weight ratios, time to fatigue, all these are what we call performance predictors, right? You don't have that predictability because you have a young athlete who hasn't, I'm just going to use a very loose number. You've increased the horsepower of a motorcycle by 1.8 horsepower because you changed the configuration of the gearbox in the gear ratios of the counter sprocket, rear sprocket. You know that it's going to pick up another 1.5 to 2 horsepower, which sounds great on a dyno until little Johnny's hanging off the back of the bike with his tongue out of his helmet and he can't hang on to the thing, and now he's got arm pump, and somehow that's the motor builder's fault. How do we collectively discuss this today where a parent that's listening is in that same scenario? Maybe they just moved up to a new bike, they moved up into an age group, and they're not there yet, but we know they will be when we get to Loretta's. How do you suggest that they build a bike, ride a bike, and then when we get to Loretta's, they're on the fastest bike? Because my job is to always be stronger than the bike. A 65.
Yeah, it's very hard, and I like that. I like that idea. For clients who will listen, and it's rare, unfortunately, like this is now my 20th plus year, something like that, as a business owner in this space. And of course I've raced, right? So been at it a long time. I would much rather have the athlete on a bike that's slightly too slow for them, that they get 100% out of, than a bike that's slightly too much. Like, so if we were 1% the other way, if there's 100% matched perfection, that's what ideally we would try to do, build a bike for the athlete. Everything matches perfectly. However, you're never going to be there. So in reality, you always have a potentially a bike that's a little too fast for a person or a bike that's a little too slow for a person. I mean, in theory, right? Every parent would say their bike's too slow, but and the parent, like, when you have, I always use the pit bike analogy, but have you ever seen kids or adults or whoever just go flog these super slow pit bikes, but they ride the wheels off the things, right? And you see a kid who even a 65 rider or an 85 rider, but even as low as a 65 rider who kind of fits a KLX 110, but because the bike is literally 12 horsepower worse or whatever it is, maybe even more than that, than the 65, they turn that thing like they cannot turn their 65. And they ride the wheels off that thing. And it's like, dude, if you just rode your race bike like that, you would rip. Well, the problem is they can't ride the race bike like that because it's too fast. And so they're not used to coming into corners, needing to hit the brakes and the bumps at that speed. And then, of course, it ruins all of their setup to hit that corner good. When you're on a slower bike, it's like, hey, I have all the time in the world to get set up for this turn. So I'm laid over early and everything's right. And, it's not kicking and bucking coming into the turn. And I don't care who does your suspension. At some point, when you go fast enough, which is every single athlete on the track, you will exceed the capability of your suspension if you want to go faster. Not exceed that it's not able to do it. But for example, like I've always said, if there's a 13-inch bump and you got 12 inches of travel, you're going to catch air. And your ability to go fast is your ability to ride through those scenarios, right? Your ability to say, hey, I know that my bike is going to catch air over the 13-inch bump. So there's a period of time where my tires don't touch the ground, which means I have no ground control. So now all these technical things come in. Or for example, no matter how good your tire is, whether you have a spec tire or a terrible brand or a worn out tire, you're always pushing your motorcycle beyond the tire's traction limits. That is what racing is. We are constantly sliding. And so no matter how good your tire is, your talent level, your ability to go fast is determined by your ability to ride it in its exceeded capability, right? Your ability to slide. So sure, you, me, and little Johnny can go buy a spec tire and pick up a second a lap, but that second applies to the kid faster than me too, because he's already exceeding his tires just like I'm exceeding mine, right? So the same thing. So on the motorcycle side, I think the bike should always be slightly slower than the athlete. And how often that mean, it's pretty rare that I encounter athletes and families that are truly utilizing everything their motorcycle has. Especially in this conversation, we're talking about amateur nationals. Maybe now that Oak Hill's a part of that structure, it's a sand track, it's fast, it's got a couple sections that are big jumps. There's areas where there are athletes, every single athlete from pro to whatever is wide open on the throttle, down a straightaway, no question. At Loretta's on race day, man, that track is rough and tough and rutted and slick and dry and everything, right? Every single condition, and it's very rarely straight. That's the challenge of Loretta's. You know, there might be a quote unquote straightaway on paper, but you're coming out of a turn to a turn. You're usually on the edge of the tire. And so as a byproduct of that, at that track, I mean, maybe the PW50 guys, are using every single horsepower that bike has. But that's a scenario where I think having your bike be a little less than you and then letting the rider be able to ride the wheels off that thing is going to be better off. Now, granted, counter to everything. Actually, I was going to say, you go out there on a KX80 that's bone stock versus a KTM 85 that's bone stock, you better be a hell of a rider if you want to beat somebody on a KTM. Now, granted, I think you have an athlete this year. He's a Cali kid, right?
Yeah, Aiden Steinbrecker's the new Team Green rider. Yep.
Right. And you just mentioned another name earlier in our conversation. I was talking about him.
Sawyer Geek.
Yeah. Is he Cali?
No, he's KTM. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So Steinbrecker. I think he did pretty well at Mini-O's, did he not?
Yep, he did really well, and it was actually his first ride on the Cowie, and not much seat time on it.
Right. So there's an example of a kid who's, I mean, the bike I'm sure is great. It's a Team Green program bike, but I can promise you it's not better than the best KTMs on track. And so there's a kid who's overcoming a little bit of deficit. And if you're a parent who thinks that Kawasaki is better than your KTM, I would bet my entire shop on it that it's not. However, that kid's still kicking ass on that thing. And of course, he's at the long play. We talk about this all the time. You take a Team Green opportunity because sure, maybe this bike's a little bit off, but undoubtedly, being a part of the Team Green program is a great opportunity, as he moves up the chain.
Well, you open up a conversation that I think it's worth diving down in. Earlier, you said you'd rather have a bike that's 1% under its capabilities than 1% over. And we say the same thing with an athlete. You're always better off coming in 1% under trained than 1% over trained, right?
Okay, elaborate on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're already tired coming in, and it's just like a motorcycle that's got 100 hours on it, dynoing it doesn't do anything except solidify the opinion that the bike's tired. I mean, why dyno a bike that's tired? And that's why tapering is so important. Tapering, by definition, is ridding the body of fatigue. But yet, and again, I'm not going to get into any of our little secrets here, but it's the idea that, most people come into most of the big races exhausted. And that's just, unfortunately, it's the lack of knowledge that's at the majority of the facilities. If we come back to what you were just talking about right there, this is why, when you look at Aiden Steinbrecker, yes, I'm very blessed to have him as a client. If I ask that little guy to stand on his head, rub his belly, and sing Kumbaya on Thursday at 3, I don't even have to ask if it's being done. I know it's being done. Same thing with Sawyer Geek. People, these types of riders get these types of opportunities because of the heart and the grit, determination. And like when you were talking about somebody purchasing a Kawasaki, saying that on a dyno it doesn't have as much horsepower, or it doesn't have this and it doesn't have that. My experience has been, and anybody who's done it or has completed a phone conversation with me has had me or heard me say this and ask this question. When you have an athlete that struggles at school, that's the athlete that's going to go the distance. Because when school comes easy, not the fear, but the plague of complacency becomes almost the inevitable downfall of an athlete. We don't have to mention any names, but think about some of these early Suzuki prodigies back in the early 2000s that they had everything going for them. And then when they got the opportunity to go pro, squandered it with drugs and chicks. And I'm not talking about painkiller drugs. That's a sad situation. I'm talking about too cool for school.
Partying, right.
Partying, chasing chicks. The ones let's just go on public record, right? Cooper Webb. At the time I was working with AC, everybody referred to AC as baby Jesus. Mitch Payton's building all of his bikes, right? He's homeschooled. He's living in a motorhome. He's traveling the country at that time.
And he was dominant. People don't really realize, but he was just insanely dominant.
And think about being Cooper Webb, right? He gets to go to YouTube, was new at the time. And he turns on YouTube and here's AC riding with Ricky Carmichael at the goat farm when nobody rode at the goat farm, right? I mean, Ricky rode at the goat farm and he'd bring in an occasional Ivan Tedesco or, a couple guest riders, just like Stewart would bring in Chisholm. And then eventually he brought in Dungy. And it's not like it is today where it just seems like it's open
Right.
season. Everybody rides together. So imagine being Cooper Webb. You know that AC's getting all of his bikes built by Mitch. The Team Green program is the biggest and strongest in the country. He's their number one guy. You see pictures of him riding with Ricky Carmichael at the goat farm. And then Cooper Webb, his dad owns a surf shop. His dad runs home. They throw the bike on a 3-rail trailer. He rides on a clapped out track with a bike that's got tires turned backwards. That's all he had. He's riding the CRF 150. It's a big, heavy lug. He's getting some help from Honda. He's a Red Bull guy, but compare being where Cooper Webb's at and where AC's at. Now, I've had the privilege. I love AC. His dad, Alan, his mom, Christy, his sister, wonderful family. Who has more grit and determination? I wouldn't say that Cooper Webb has more grit and determination than AC, because I'm on public record as saying I never had an athlete work as hard as AC. I would say Ashley Feilich and Ian Treadle were probably right second to that point. Very, very strong, hard workers. My point being is Cooper Webb has been dealt so many more hard cards. I mean, it's all public record about the idea that, he pretty much just begged Star Yamaha to bring him on board, give him a chance, because nobody else would give him a chance. And then up to and including last year winning the championship, up to and including last weekend when it seems like all the odds against him. Well, that's because Cooper Webb has had the living daylights beat out of him for his entire life. He's always getting sloppy seconds. He's always getting hand-me-downs and everything else. And going back full circle, somebody where school comes easy, when it gets hard, that's when they bail.
100%. You're
one that
nailed it.
Scrapped, that like our elite team, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but we've had our elite team going on 14 years this year. It'll be going on 15, I believe. And I used to say in our staff meetings, I want our team to be the bad news bears. I'm showing my age here, but most of the young kids would know what the bad news bears are. And I always looked for the kids who had duct tape boots. I look for the kids that turn their tires backwards, because on our team, we have lubricant deals, we have gas deals, we have tire deals, we have seat cover deals, we have graphics, gear, helmets, right? So you get put on our team. Not only are you going to save a tremendous amount of money on my coaching services, but you're also going to get all kinds of partnership discounts that you're not going to get if you're doing it by yourself. So now these riders, when we just give them a chance, they can actually make money on our program. Money saved is money made. I always look for the kids that were outside the top 5 in Type 10, because those are the ones that if you ask for another 20-minute moto, they don't negotiate. They're like, yes, sir. Where do we start?
That's the most frustrating part. I just had this conversation with the mom yesterday, picked up a bike, and they have good means, but they're not from a moto background. So to her, it's like, this is a wild industry, because she goes to the track and there's the rotor arms, the rigs, and kids are homeschooled. And she's like, what is this? Because they're kind of new to it.
Yeah.
And they're rare type that has means that came into the sport, right? That's just rare when you have somebody who like doctors and lawyers, right? That's not common in our sport.
Right.
So I was like, the challenge that she's going to have with her child and the dad, they were great people. I mean, there's phenomenal people, but is that because you're capable of giving your kid everything, he won't know what it is to not have that. So you really need to kind of like slow the roll on giving him everything and make him earn everything. And so like right now, the kid's not a top 5 schoolboy 1 kid or whatever, or any, in any category. And that's where he'd like to be. So don't give him top 5 treatment. Like, he's not going to need 25 motorcycles and all of them built up, and, grow the program as your kid grows, but only when he puts in the effort. And you see it all the time. And like you said, Cooper, I think when you look back at the history of Cooper Webb, like you said, it absolutely makes sense as to who he is today. Mm-hmm. He is the grittiest, hardest to beat guy late in a race, late in a championship. If he can sink his teeth into an opportunity to win, if he thinks that there's a chance, there's not many people. He's like a dog who got his teeth on a bone and he ain't letting go, because he's the scrapyard dog and the street dog, because he did get beat his whole career and chased young. And then he did have some success, right? But the same thing in 450s. Like, he's had opportunity. He had his first debut in 450s, went really rough with Yamaha, and then he got the opportunity at KTM. Clearly at the time that bike and program were better for him. Crushed it. Then he kind of fell off a little bit. He gets to win another title last year. And I say fell off, and with all due respect, he didn't really fall off. He just didn't win more titles.
Right.
Wins another title. And I mean, the guy knows how to grind. And very few of those who are, like you said, what you call it, complacency.
Yep.
When you get complacent, all things go by the wayside, because you're not improving. And that's the struggle.
This is where I get accused of being a jerk, right? If somebody comes to our program and I talk to them, and I'm going to use some big words on purpose, right? if somebody comes to us and over the course of the first year, we teach them about lactate threshold, we teach them about the glycogen synthase enzyme, we talk to them about the lactic acid shuffle, we talk about the myotactic stretch reflex. And we go through all these things that makes them a smarter, more durable athlete. And then on year number 2, and I'll take something, I use big words on purpose because we talk every week, so the athlete becomes educated. I try to educate the athlete, and then you run your acquired experiences and data through that. And then you have that aha moment. You go, okay, have the epiphany, it clicks. I know what you mean now. You talked about it. I experienced it. Now I understand it. All right. Well, then you get to, and I'm just going to call it what it is. I call it the B class curse, right? The B class is the bane of my existence.
Right.
Because what happens is for 3-4 years, I work with an athlete and we make our way to the top, right? At the time of this recording, we have 417 number 1 amateur plates and we have 4 number 1 pro plates. It's a process and system that I know works, but when you know it, and I'll use the example of foam rolling. You foam roll, it hurts like crazy.
Right.
Working on it, you get the trigger points out, you stop foam rolling because it doesn't hurt, and I remind you that it doesn't hurt because you were foam rolling, so keep foam rolling. Because when you foam roll, you increase the length of the muscle, a muscle that's at its fullest length has the highest amount of power and the best amount of sprint speed and endurance for a bundle of physiological reasons. So now you and I have been together for 4 years. You know foam rolling works. You're in the B class. Maybe you're getting a couple bikes. Maybe you're getting some parts allowance. And you know you should foam roll, but you don't. And that's the complacency that I have to immediately I will tap out and stop working with you. And that's when I get accused of being the jerk. So let me get this straight. I've worked with you for 4 years. I've gotten you to where you wanted to be. You know what you should do. And I don't think I should have to remind you because champions have champion habits. I shouldn't remind you to go to bed. You know you need 9 hours of sleep. If you can mix 2-stroke oil, you damn sure don't need your parents reminding you to brush your teeth and go to bed on time. Because champions have champion habits. And then you get somebody like a Cooper Webb who doesn't have all of the luxuries. You say it to him one time, you need to be in bed by 10 o'clock because you're getting up at 7, and you'll never have to ask him twice. And you will never not see him in bed at 10 o'clock. Never. So then when you see the results, and then the kids, and again, I'm going to throw moto dads under the bus here because the moto dads are just as bad as the riders, right? Oh, my kid's the shit at the track now. We're the fastest guy at the track. We're the B-class stud. You're a pain in my ass. And the reason why I say it so blunt is you've seen what we've done to get here. So let's just put that into a percentage of improvement, whether you want to do it in time or as a percentage of strength, weight ratios, et cetera, et cetera. You know what you've done. So let's just say the improvement over the last 4 years has been 7%. And now you're the fastest guy. If you kept doing what you're doing, not only will you be the best, you now can gap everybody and welcome to the world of Jet Lawrence. Jet got good and never stopped improving. And now everybody's trying to figure out what the hell he's doing. He just kept.
And now we'll see the interesting question of complacency, meaning he is at a point now where he needs to continue to evolve because they're chasing him. So we're going to find out, right? He's been hurt now 2 years in a row, but we are going to find out if Jet can continue this rolling or if he will slack into complacency, but he did not slack all the way until a couple 450 championships. Meaning we know we have a history of right now him getting better and better and working and grinding and being the best because he didn't get complacent, right? And so again, everybody goes through it, but you know, MC was the GOAT for a long time.
But what do we always say? The past predicts the future.
100%. So we know that that's what he wants.
Well, that's what's frightening. I think if I was racing against Jet, I'd be more concerned this year than I was the last time, because in Cooper Webb's the same way. When you see somebody bounce back from adversity, and you can give Hayden Deegan credit for this. You can give Jet. Remember when Jet tried to jump the artificial downhill triple that didn't exist and then wadded himself up on the opening lap, right? That's embarrassing as heck. And he is able to swallow his pride, all the garbage that happened publicly with his agent and all this other stuff, right? He's proven that he can literally compartmentalize, push that aside. And if you're racing him, you're like, damn, nothing gets under that guy's skin. Shoot, he came back from yet another injury. If he comes back, which I know, well, I shouldn't say I know, I'm pretty confident that he's doing a lot of things. He's going to come back faster than he was before he got hurt. Rusty? Absolutely. There's nothing, nothing replaces gains.
Right. No, but he's doing all he can to be successful. We have that history. And I agree entirely. It's like you said, we have a past.
Why do we say what we do about Cooper Webb? You were just talking about it earlier. He's shown he's not letting go of that, like your analogy. The dog's not letting go of the bone. And so now you piss him off and you're like, oof. And so what do the commentators say? Oh, don't poke the bear. You know,
Yep.
hey, if you get around Jason Anderson, he's not afraid to move you off the track, right? And
Yep.
so we start looking at our opinions of other people are based on historical patterns and behavior. And that's what I love about what we're talking about here. You'll have people that say, oh, you need more power. And then you give them an example where you're like, it's not more power, it's the ability to use the power. Okay, you're fit. Now you have to use, and I say this very politely, now you have to use your brain. Because if you apply the strategy, the inverse relationship, 20-minute moto, you cannot go out at a pace as if it's a 3-minute race or a 6-lap race. You've got to apply an intensity. Now, again, I don't want to lay out too much of our secrets, but the idea here is if I can, my number one goal is to take you as an athlete and your 80% is everybody else's 100% effort. So you're showing up to the starting grid and I'm on a 450 and you're on an 85. Doesn't matter how freaking fast you are, I'm going to win. If I just stay up on 2 wheels, I have good line choices, I will beat you on sheer power.
Well, and here's a
Sheer
great
gear.
question. It'd be a great field of fodder. Is if Jet lined up on a 250F outdoors, does he win some motos?
If he doesn't win, he'll come darn close.
I think he wins
And
some motos.
if he doesn't win, it would only surely be where it's evident on a direct.
Yeah. But I mean, I think he, over the course of 35 minutes, I think there's races he would win at. It's not that it's easier. It's not that he's that, but I think the point is that if power was everything in our world, right, then that would not be even remotely possibly true. But I can,
right.
We saw his lap times when he was on 250Fs versus the 450 class. We know, right, kind of where that was at. Now, I'm not saying he would win a full field. Yeah, no way. I don't think you'd win it because the starts would be too bad. He'd always be coming from behind, right? All the things that come with that. But I promise you, he'd probably win a moto or two every single season if he did it, and he'd be at a power deficit. And then everybody say, well, that bike is so fast. Well, do you want to go ride that bike? You wouldn't see Eli Tomac or Ken Roczen or Chase Sexton switching places to go ride the 250. I promise you that. So that's an example of what you're talking about, and that's why I think when we look at Jet, we look at even Chase or Tomac or Webb. Actually, I think it's a great example of this. Chase and Tomac and Jet and Hunter oftentimes get off the track and they're not spent, which is unbelievable. The modern sport is at a level that's, just unheard of. But guys like Cooper Webb.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
That is anybody who's listening to this, take what you just said, and that exactly is a physical picture of what I'm saying. They're racing at 80%, which is everyone else's 100%. Go ahead, finish your thought.
Exactly right. So to say those guys are able to and that's why they're good on their bad days. They have reserve. And so they're able to dig a little deeper on their rough days, their sick days, their bad travel, their bad sleep nights, something didn't go right. Or the bike, we talked about this, we didn't talk about on the show yet. If your bike setup's a little off, you can see sometimes when what I call it a rider checks out, he didn't give it his full effort. So their heart rate drops off. They go get a terrible result. They didn't even quote unquote physically try hard. On the flip side of that, you could overcome that motorcycle by trying harder and pushing deeper into deficit. But if you're already at 100%, there's no more harder to try. You can't do it. And that's where those guys are.
You've got two distinct situations and scenarios, and I think it's worth breaking them down. If you come to me and you're on the side of the track and we're standing with the parents, and because I don't have the knack for it like you see, and you're like, that bike is it's staying seated where it's supposed to, it's not rebounding, it's doing what it's supposed to do. And then I look at the heart rate data, average and max, and I see that we're not at an average and a max that we trained specifically and we know he's capable of. That's when you know a rider's sandbagging. Now, when you come to me and you say, Rob, we went the wrong direction. Well, we need to slow down the rebound. It's kicking. We got a lot of wheel spin. We're losing acceleration out of the corner. I can look at the average and max of that. When you tell me the bike's not right, next moto we change it. You say, yep, we're in the right ballpark. I should see that heart rate intensity is still at the same race intensity. And this is where, and again, I don't want to give away our Coca-Cola syrup, but these are ways that we're able to track when a rider is sandbagging and when a rider is not getting along with the bike. Now, to your point, if I've got somebody that the bike is just not handling well, it's pogo sticking everywhere, and their heart rate's abnormally high, that's not a strategical error. That's a pit bull that says, I'll ride this doggone thing till it throws me on the ground. Not that we want you to get thrown on the ground, but like you said, you're going to work harder to try to control the bike, but that competitor, that fire in the belly, you will be able to quantify it on a heart rate monitor chart. You will be able to bounce it against lap times.
And that's what I was going to say.
Sit together.
Right. at the pro level, we see this. People maybe miss this, but look at Cooper Webb when he's put in his heroic rides over the last few years. That dude is worked when he gets off the bike. They're like, oh, he wanted, he passed Kenny late in the race for that one season. He just, and put Kenny in the hit locker. And then like recently, I'll go back to last year when he wins the title. He wins that title. I think it was in New York, or when he passes Chase Sexton, beats him for the win. And if you looked at the two athletes, the second they got off their motorcycle, Webb was worked that night. And Chase always looks like Chase looks. He's within his comfort zone. He looked not that tired. He had not pushed himself to the absolute physical exhaustion level, because that's Chase. That's Chase. That's DeLawrence's for the most part. That's how those guys operate. But Webb is capable of digging deep, and that's what makes him the dog in him, and pushing himself to his limits. And he knew he had to win that night, and that secured him a title. And guess what he did? He dug to 105%, everything he had, and he basically put his stamp of approval on a championship because he had that ability to push through his threshold, right? And not everybody has that, but like to your point, you can't win titles being at your threshold the entire time. It's just not possible to do it over 17 weeks. So instead, these guys like Chase and even Coop, they're riding within this 80%. They're at their 80% when a dude in 10th would have to give it 100% to stick with him for one lap.
You just made a comment that I think cannot be passed over. How humiliating is it when, and you're in the midst of behind the scenes on a lot of these teams that people don't realize. That these teams all talk. And how humiliating, how demoralizing is it when you find out that Jet's racing at 82% of his maximum, and you go down and you download your data and you're at almost damn near sub-maximal for the entire moto. And just for the people who are listening and want to put some observation into what you're seeing in real time, remember when Jet first went pro, he wanted to win by 92 seconds, right? And then the last couple of years, he wins by 2 seconds. And then if somebody gets within a couple seconds, you notice how he notches it up a little bit for a lap or two, puts that 2.5 second gap, then it kind of settles again. That's what I love about James Stewart. He's so observant. If you go back and you listen to last year's Outdoor Nationals when Jet was out there, what'd James say? Oh, look at Jet. He's slowing down the second half of the first moto. What did James say? He's getting ready for the second moto. Jet out there, he's halfway through the second moto. Look at Jet's pulling back. He's saving energy for next weekend. James is the only person that picked up on it. And we talk about it in our staff meetings. This is one of the things that we do as a team is we watch races together and we talk about what is it that we're seeing physiologically. We may or may not get access to some people's heart rate data, and we're able to talk about those. What you're seeing on TV is strategic. And when an athlete can go out and race at 80 to 85% and control the narrative of the race, I speed up when I need to. I go back to where I can conserve as much energy as possible. Therefore, I can race from January to October.
It is frustrating as an amateur, like side of things, is a lot of these kids are trained to go 100% all the time, full maximal effort, sprint laps, all these things. And it makes sense when you listen to one of these trainers like, oh, you got to pull the whole shot and sprint away and give it everything you got and then hang on to it to the end. That's a method that can work for 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 14 minutes, maybe 15. Like that's a feasible methodology because of track placement, meaning if your competitor starts 12th and he's 10 seconds behind you coming around the second corner, well, in, let's say 6 laps, he's going to have to be way better than you to catch you, right? And that works. And that's kind of the Michael Lessie. Of course, he was phenomenally high level of this, but he lost a lot of national champion. He lost a lot of outdoor motos beyond 25 minutes. The dude did everything you could possibly do on paper correctly when it came to hole shots, good opening laps, fast, and he was fit. That wasn't really his trouble, right? We know that. He just flat out, and it was probably a little bit of going to KTM early on and these other things. Villapoto just had a little more speed. But had those races been 25 minutes, he wins a whole bunch of titles, right?
Yep.
The point, though, is that these facilities are like, hey, flat out. And I think that you said to the strategy side, most of the, and now we see it in Triple Crown, but most of these top pros now are never at their limit. I mean, you hear it even in interviews. Like Chase is like, well, that was pretty much my limit. Well, it wasn't my limit, but it's how fast I can go for that period of time. Because they know these numbers. They have a guy like you or you on their side, and then they've worked at this. And so, I mean, that's the evolution of sport. And it's a lot different than just, hey, we're going to do sprint laps until you can go as fast as you can go. And then we're just going to hang on for dear life. It doesn't work. And the same applies on the motorcycle. I mean, you can go give a 9-year-old who's big enough to ride 85s a super mini. Does not mean he's going to win the super mini class. He's not there yet, right? He's not physically, mentally, physically capable yet of going the speed that that motorcycle can go.
Well, there's two things that you just said. Number one, let's go back to Cooper Webb being able to dig deep and give that 105% as you reference. This fits right in line with what I said earlier. If you're 1% overtrained, you don't have that extra gear. If you're 1% undertrained, we call it going to the well. Every athlete's only got a certain number of times they can go to the well. And that's for your entire career, whether you want to admit it or not. Our strategy as a performance company is to help athletes identify we don't want to go there often. And if you train correctly, you shouldn't have to go there often, if ever. Okay, that's another story for a different day. But the one thing that you just mentioned, these facilities, these so-called riding coaches that are telling their athletes you've got to sprint and then just hang on for dear life. You don't get faster by sprinting. And just to give you an example of this, if you and I are going to drag race, everybody would take a bigger sized motor, right? If I always challenge you to a 450 versus a 65, and we're going to drag race a quarter mile, every single person is going to grab the 450. And I simply ask the same question. Why? Well, it's got a bigger motor. Okay, then why in the hell are you doing sprints 51 weeks out of the year? If I take a 65 and I just keep drag racing it and drag racing it and drag racing it and drag racing it, I'm not making it faster. You can call it names. It isn't going to create horsepower. If you don't rebuild the body, right? You get a motor that's got 20 hours on it. You're like, hey, let's put a new top end on. Well, how does the body supposed to recover? Only through sleep and food. Oh, sleep is what you do when you die. You know, you need to be intermittent fasting because all this bullshit that's out there. Then you look at the idea, well, if sprinting is the only way to get fast, well, then why don't you turn the throttle a little bit further on the 65? Is that going to create more power? Well, no, dipshit. It can only go so fast. Well, what's its limiting power? Or excuse me, what's its limiting variable? Power. What are you not doing? You're not in the gym getting strong. Okay, wait a second. I take go with me for relative terms. Let's say a 450 has a carburetor. I take the 450 and I put a 65 carb on it. And you go, no, that won't work. And I'm like, why? It's got a piston. It will go. It's strong. And you're like, well, dude, you're an idiot. You know nothing about motorcycles. It needs to have carburetor. Why? It's got to have air. Oh, okay. So you're telling me if I go to the mechanical world, I need a big piston and a big carburetor. And then when I tell you I'm going to work on a strength base and an aerobic engine, you tell me I'm full of shit that we're going to get fast by doing sprint work. You just contradicted yourself in the realm of common sense, because you can't get fast by doing sprints all the time. You damn sure can't do it by doing them 51 weeks out of the year. Go to any track, any trainer, any facility. What are you doing? Sprint.
Well, and this is super frustrating is, so there's a trainer, we had him on the show, Kyle Swanson, and I actually love Kyle. I think he's a great human, and he has some good analogies. And he had a video that published ages ago that basically said, how would you hit this corner if you're on a mountain bike?
Mm-hmm.
Would you come into the corner, slam the brakes, both brakes, hit the pedal, slam back on the brakes, hit the pedals, hit the brakes, and then go out of the turn? Or would you try to come in as fast as you could, smoothly come in, don't touch brakes or pedal, go through the corner and get back on the pedal, right? Like, if you ride mountain bikes, you know, you have to keep your momentum up. You can't give away speed for no reason. So you can't hit the brakes if you don't need to. And whenever you lose speed on a mountain bike, you have to work twice as hard to get it back, right? It's so much harder to get back to speed than it is to keep your speed. Well, the exact same thing's true on a motorcycle. And he was basically giving this analogy of like, why are you guys coming into this corner, slamming on your rear brake, hitting the front brake, have the throttle wide open, pulling the clutch in, pulling the clutch out, all these things all at the same time? You wouldn't be pedaling on your bicycle and hitting the brakes at the same time because it wouldn't work.
Yep.
And it was like, that was a good analogy. The way you want to hit a corner fast on a dirt bike is the same way you want to hit it fast on your mountain bike, which is carry as much speed as you possibly can continuously through this corner. But to your point, just by sprinting laps, a sprint lap is conceptually go as hard as you can, as fast as you possibly can, just do everything hard. Well, okay, great. But maybe I'm establishing bad habits, number one, because that's how I'm going to hit that corner. I'm going to come in there, slam the brakes really hard, slam the clutch, hit the throttle, do all these things that I'm trying to do to go as fast as I can because I don't know how to go that fast. That's fundamentally what a sprint lap is, right? I do not know how to go any faster than I know how to go, so I'm trying to figure something out. Now, the reality is, and there's a great coach out of Austin. I think he is the best guy in the country when it comes to this. Unfortunately, his demographic is essentially beginners. And that's how he makes way more money than most of these other trainers because he's figured it out. That's who you should teach. Guy doesn't know how to ride a dirt bike. Well, he surely appreciates you when he learned how to ride a dirt bike in one day, right?
Yep.
But he's big on corners and he's big about flowing and entry, but it's all technique based. And guess what? If you want to go faster on the dirt bike track, be strong, be fit, be capable of manhandling the motorcycle when need be capable of being patient when you need be, but also let's hit this rut really smooth, the right way, a little slower a few times, the right technique a few times. And then now that muscle memory habit's getting established, let's pick up the speed and pick up the speed and pick up the speed. This is a pyramid building process. And your sprint, your peak speed is when all of the base of the pyramid comes together into a perfect lap. And I think it is a great example to that to this day and age is the Lawrences, is Chase, is all of the Tomacs. You know, they all have their own little flair, but they look so smooth nowadays. And they're the fastest guys on track. And then you go look at like a 20th place guy who's just barely hanging onto the motorcycle. And I say he's a pro, right? But his feet dabbed a few times and his front end looked like it washed and he looked like he was trying and he was 3 seconds a lap or 2 seconds a lap off of these elite guys. And only reason I observe this is when I have non-motocross fans watch racing, my friends who are non-moto people, and it's on TV. I got in the shop, I got it, whatever, right? They go, oh, wow, that looks fun. They are like, oh, is he even trying? We're talking about the leaders. And then it pans to some lapper that they're blowing by, which is sad because that lapper's the fastest guy you and I know, right?
Absolutely.
And like he's trying, he's all over the place, and like he's just nowhere near the same level of smoothness. And they're literally at the end of a moto 8 seconds a lap off of these elite guys. And that's how all you should know as a parent is it's not harder, it's not faster engine, it's not all these things that will give you this elite top end speed. It's carrying speed, right? And then like you said, if your body isn't strong enough to do it, isn't fit enough to do it, what are you going to do?
Well, and this is where I have a little bit of a cynical sense of humor because people will say, it doesn't matter how strong or flexible I am. It doesn't matter how big my aerobic engine is. I'll just buy stiffer suspension and a faster motor. And I'm like, that's only going to expose your lack of strength and your flexibility in your aerobic engine. And you mentioned earlier about, giving somebody a super mini bike and then they're not going to go win the super mini class. I had a gentleman that offered me 5 figures for Adam C's amateur fitness program. And I had a commitment I do to all my clients. I will never sell anybody's program, whether it's Sawyer Geek, Aiden Steinbrecher's, whether it's Adam C's, Ian Treadle's, Ashley Felix, Brock Tickles. I never sell any of those, right? Dungy's, Martin Brothers, Jordan Bailey, whoever you know that I've worked with, if that matters to you. The idea here is you talked about giving some young rider, a championship. Give somebody Sawyer Geek's championship bike. You're not going to go win just because you're on his bike. And I always used to say, where I said to this gentleman, I said, not only would I not sell because I gave that commitment to Alan and Christy, I said, his program would destroy you. You have no idea how hard of a worker that young man is. So the programs that I write for him are based on, we tested, we have baseline. I measure his improvement. We retest, we measure we measure the percentage of improvement. We know what he's done to get that percentage of improvement. I write the next training block based on that improvement, the ability to absorb. Anybody can write workouts, right? It's the idea, can you write the finite balance between volume, intensity, frequency, work-rest ratios to get enough adaptation so that when Cooper goes to the race, he's 1% undertrained that allows him to dig deep when he needs to and do that over a decade of professional racing. And how many parents, and I hate to say this because this is an amateur show, how many parents think that winning Loretta's on an 85 is going to make a difference when you go to A1? Now, neither you nor I are arguing with the idea, if you do well now, yes, you get picked up early and then you get that carpet ride to going into the pro ranks. It's necessary, but we never want to do it. And I'll go on public record as saying, Sawyer Geek in his program is not running himself into the ground to win an amateur title. He is so fit. His 80% is like everyone's 150%.
Right. That's super important. Right. You have to be there because, and even to your point, Alan C talked about this, but he was hard, his kid was so good that he had to be super hard on him to get the best out of him, essentially. Maybe a little too hard on him. We could agree. But, when Cincer was coming home from Loretta's, there's those stories about his dad's unhappy with his performances, even though he won by 30 seconds. And I'll give it Adam. He's probably the most mature young man I've ever seen about dealing with parents on this. But he said, well, I wanted my dad to be that hard on me because my dad always said, well, that's not good enough because we're going pro and these aren't pros. We need to be, and he wasn't wrong. Like he was the wonder kid coming into pro. He got hurt and got hurt and got hurt and got hurt, right? But I mean, he was blazing fast his rookie year. So, and he won a 250 title, right? He was blazing fast his rookie 450 years. He was the fastest qualifier, like X amount of weekends. The dude had the speed, but obviously his career did not pan out the way that he would want it to. But to the point is you can win out like as so. Yeah, he had a great career. Yeah, he was factory dude. Yeah, he made some money. No qualms about it. But he was the winningest amateur sports ever seen, and it didn't quite pan out the way that I would guarantee you he'd trade places with Cooper Webb's accolades in pro career. I guarantee you he'd trade places with the Lawrences. I guarantee as far as accolades, right? Not as a human, just that was his. He wanted to be MC, right? That was his ultimate goal in life, and he didn't quite get there, and that's just unfortunate for him. But the point is that no matter your past victories as amateurs mean nothing when it comes to your pro resume. All the pro teams care about is can you win today? And if you sell out the farm on 85s and burn yourself out and burn your kid out and basically dumpster fire at that age, it's not going to mean anything when your kid's 18.
Well, and this is the thing that I try to do as a company, and this is not a sales pitch on our services as much as I hope I can change some of the parents' perspective. Winning amateur races is what champions do when you're on your way to the top.
100%.
How you get there is where the science comes in. How you stay there is when we really knock it up another notch. I'm on public record saying the first championship's not hard, and I say that very humbly. Knowing what you've done the first time to repeat the championship is when it gets real. And with copious notes and a dedicated athlete who's willing to listen, especially when they've heard some things. Because when you look at human performance, sure, you're going to talk about strength and flexibility and nutrition and sports psychology. There's a lot of similar broad-based subjects. The nuances of you getting a little bit smarter, have a little bit more experience, a little bit more gate drops. We call it athletic maturity. That increases your racecraft. Racecraft built on a foundation of minimal injuries, minimal downtime of illness. You get more maturity in a shorter period of time because you get more consistency because there's no setbacks. And then you win the championship. You sit down, you break it all. Now, again, you've got to be willing to look at the numbers to see what we've done, because I'm never going to be the person that says, do it because I said so. Do it because you understand why we're doing it. Remember, I put the nugget of knowledge in front of you. You accumulate the data. You take your experience and data, you run it back through the nugget, you get that epiphany, we go to the next level.
And that's like, I think I agree with you entirely. It's harder to do number two.
Yes.
I totally agree. I think we lucked into our first amateur national championship. It was, a lot of hard work. The shop's there, you get the job, whatever. And literally it was like a smorgasbord of a moto, it came down to who passed who late in the moto, and not even the athlete that, won didn't control their own destiny that day. They were relying on someone else to have a bad moto. And so, you get it, and you didn't know you got it. The moto finishes, and then you got to do the math. Okay. Oh, wow, cool. They won a title. But that's but to be there a second time, that's just from a shop standpoint. From an athlete standpoint, I think it's even, like you said, it's much harder for a host of reasons, because now I think there's more pressure, right? And then there's other aspects of it too, where you've got to be better again because everybody else is going to be better. I mean, I think we see that today. Would you agree? I think pro racing's, I know the sport's deep. I know we've had great eras, but I'm watching like the 450 class going, we've never had better racing. There's so many guys right now who are capable of winning races and actually in the mix. Not just capable like we say every year, but you're actually in the mix of winning races. And then number two, go look at the qualifying times back to 10th. Go look at the peak speed of a dude in 5th. Go look at the peak speed of a dude in 10th, in 15th. And it's like, because I think we have the best facilities, the best bikes, we have longer careers, so better athletes stay around longer than they've ever stayed around. I mean, look at Jason Anderson. Here's a dude who got 8th one weekend and is up front winning motos another weekend, right? It's just unbelievable how good these guys are.
Well, what I think is, when you look at it from a motor standpoint, if the bike's fresh and you know how to set it up suspension-wise, and you're doing all the maintenance, right? You're keeping it in its sweet spot power-wise. You're rotating it, keeping it relatively fresh. You've got the suspension so it's balanced, and you set the sag and all those little nuances that are necessary. The motor world, when I say motor and mechanical world, suspension motor, is predictable.
Yeah.
Ironically, so is human performance, but you have more variables. If you look at, I refer to these as pillars. Pillar number one is being fed, rested, hydrated, and focused. So now you've got four variables in the first pillar. Second pillar is being fit, strong, strength base, aerobic engine, and sprint speed. We refer to it as lactate tolerance. So you add that plus flexibility, you've got another four variables. So in two verticals, you have 8 variables. We get to the third one, it's the inverse relationship between volume and intensity, which is, we refer to it as strategy. Then you look at the fourth pillar and it's recovery per hour at the race, at the day, recovering day to day on a weekend of racing, or recovering day to day over a week of racing like Loretta's, and then recovering over training block, year over year. 4 variables in 1, 4 variables in 2, 2 variables in 3, 4 variables in 4. Look at all those variables that an athlete has to hit every day if they want to be consistent.
Well, and like on the engines, yeah.
You buff up your calorie intake, you're going to negatively impact your ability tomorrow because of what you missed today. There's a lot of moving
super
parts.
Important from every aspect, like whether it be training blocks, whether it be in race season, whether it be at Loretta's, right? This is compounding. It's compounding interest, right? It's putting money in the bank every day, and it's putting money in the bank for your body every day, like the 1% better analogy, which if we could truly get 1% better every day, we'd be, unbelievably good at everything. But that's in the engine side the same way, right?
Well, this is why I get frustrated, because if somebody paid you X amount of dollars for a beautifully, legal mod motor, and then they don't run radiator fluid and it runs hot, and you're like, well, what'd you think was going to happen? Or they don't run enough oil and it grenades itself, and you're like, what'd you think was going to happen? It's exactly that absolute in the physiology world. Yes, you will still be able to physically walk across the street if you don't eat enough calories today, but that definitely has a negative impact on your ability to recover. And then you compound that the opposite direction every day, or let's go January through Loretta's, you put in the work and you wonder why you're slower now than you were in January.
I meant to ask you about this question. And it's I've got a family that I'm kind of dealing with on this. What would you say? I got to go here in a minute. What would you say is the most developmental aspect age-wise? And I know it's different for a little bit, but the difference in performance from age 14 to 17 is dramatic for these elite guys, right? So you take a 14-year-old who hasn't quite really gone through puberty all the way. They're an 85 rider, maybe 13, right? Depending on their age. But by the time they're 17 years old, it's like, these are like, look at Deegan, age 14 at Loretta's versus he's winning pro outdoors at age 17, 18, right?
Yeah.
But imagine what had happened if Deegan had been hurt at 14 significantly. Let's say a 4 or 5 monther, and then hurt at 15, 4 or 5 monther, and then hurt at 16, 4 or 5 monther, and then hurt at 17, 4 or 5 monther, or along the way, they underfeed every single year during his hard peak training, right? He would never have become who he was.
Nope.
So as a parent, you have to understand that, like, what you're talking about is hypercritical in these early developmental stages. You know what I mean? Like, especially when because I look at it like a growth window. It's no different. Well, I mean, we could look at it at age 3 to 6. A 3-year-old is not a 6-year-old. We know that on 50s, right? You can see it. So all of that compounds every single day. You have to be fed. You have to be hydrated. You have to be rested. And if you miss out on that, it just adds up later down the chain.
Well, we don't rehearse our conversations, and this is a perfect example of it. The year that I was working with Logan Best, that I don't know if it was 85 class super mini, doesn't matter. I don't know if the listeners remember, but if I go from 4th place, my rider Logan Best was battling with Casey Cochran. The rider in front of us was Hayden Deegan, and most people won't remember who the rider was in front of Hayden Deegan that year, Daxton Bennett. And to your point exactly, Daxton's been hurt ever since he got out of that class. He had to get out of that class because he was so big, he was about to wrap his legs around the backwards of the handlebars. And then, yes, Daxton went over to Yamaha when Deegan did, right? And then whose career is looking good right now? Where's Daxton? Where's Deegan? What is it that Brian always focused on? Be able to ride another day.
Yeah, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious, stay healthy.
Logan Best, I tried my best, and then they chose to go a different direction for different reasons. I have my reasons, but Logan started getting hurt a lot more after we parted ways. And then Daxton Bennett got hurt. And then Casey Cochran's gotten hurt, not any fault of his own on this last one, but as an amateur, a lot of injuries, a lot of concussions. And then he went pro, and then a bike grenaded, and then he's really gotten hurt.
Right. And it compounds, right? They're behind the 8 ball from where they were. And it's all of those things we talk about 100%. And I think the same applies on, every aspect of the racing program. So I got a jet. Appreciate the
Brother, I
chat today.
appreciate it. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us. Hopefully you learned a lot today. Dyno Time, episode number 23. Like I said, brought to you by our friends at HP Race Development. You're looking at the man, the myth, and the legend himself. Derek, appreciate it. Appreciate all the subscribers, the listeners. Thank you for the kind messages. We look forward to seeing you next month. Be safe.
Thanks, Coach.